Ged. Thanks. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Meredith, and congratulations on taking up the role of Secretary of UnionsWA, the third woman to do so, I understand. And those three wonderful women are here with us today. And lots of wonderful women and men from the WA union movement. It really is the glitterati, you could say, almost, of the union movement here this morning. And I'm very thrilled to be here as well. Actually, it's interesting because I turned 50 this year as well. So there you go. It's quite auspicious. It was meant to be, I think. You know, trade and labour councils are incredibly important to the union movement. As president of the ACTU, I've got to say I've never really, I guess, appreciated just how important that body is. As a federal peak body, we are in many ways removed from the very core of our union movement, which of course are our 2 million members. And without trades and labour councils, you know, a peak body like the ACTU just can't operate. We can't connect to our members. We can't get right down to the very incredible grassroots nature of our movement, which is what really we're all about. So I, for one, want to thank Meredith and past and present leaders of all our trades and labour councils for the incredibly important work that you do and for making our movement as strong as it is and for keeping it ticking over. We had, Meredith, in preparation for today, Meredith gave me a brief history of UnionsWA, and it really is a wonderful piece, and I hope it gets spread around because it was a great read, and the young man who did it, I understand it was a uni student, was commissioned to actually pull it all together. It gives a really wonderful analysis, I think, of the development of the trade union movement, particularly the Trades and Labour Council here in WA. It indicates, the analysis indicates, I guess, a maturing of the trade union movement in Western Australia, and an understanding of how it grew, of course, with the political arm, the Labor Party, but also that it developed over time an understanding that it had to have its own agenda, that it had to stand on its own feet, independent of the Labor Party. And I think that that is incredibly important because without a trade union movement that has its agenda, that has its interests, its workers and its members at heart, we don't have a civil society. We don't have a balance in society. Trade unions provide that balance that I think is so important. And if you look at the battles that your state has fought, and it goes through it in this little history, they're the worst of the worst. You have really faced it, all of it, here in WA. And talking to Clive before, when he said when he was secretary, he tried to tell them at the ACTU what was coming. They wouldn't listen.
They never do.
They never do. Comrades, I've learned a lesson. I'm listening and I'm watching because you still face the worst of the worst over here. But you fought those battles, you fought them really hard and you've won. And when you haven't won, well, it doesn't matter. You've bounced back and you're going to fight them again. And you've been successful, I know. We've really got to sit up and take note of what you guys do over here. It's amazing and continue to have. You're progressive. I mean, you know, you've created, just looking at this room, the wonderful people in this room that have grown out of the union movement over here. All the wonderful women, you know, just all these great women sitting here in this room that are now members of Parliament, that have led the union movement, that are in our commission. I heard the other day, Joe McDonald told me that he gave a keynote speech to the suffragette movement over here. That's progressive. I tell you. So, you know, it really is a wonderful thing to celebrate, is your history, what you're doing now, and where you're heading. Yes, you know, the trade union movement in Western Australia has its own agenda, that's very clear, and is still fighting fearlessly, I think. But it is still connected, very connected to our voice in Parliament, to our political arm. And we can never ever be told that the connection of the trade union movement and our political arm is irrelevant or shouldn't occur. It's incredibly important and it has to stay and it has to be strong. It is a complex and demanding relationship, I think, that relationship between trade unions and the ALP. And I think nobody embodies how successful that relationship can be and how important that is than the inimitable and the wonderful Mr. Robert J. Hawke.
Thank you very much, Ged and Meredith. And particularly, Ged, thank you for the very kind compliment and for the succinct but very accurate summary you made of the outstandingly successful record of the trade union movement in this country. I want to thank you most sincerely, Meredith, for the invitation to be here. That is not simply being polite, but it's always a genuine pleasure to come back to what I still regard as my hometown. My connection with the labour movement started here in this city a year before most of you were born. 1947, my first year at the University of Western Australia Law School. I joined the Labour Party there. There was a Labour club at the university. I soon discovered it was basically run by the Coms. I wanted an ALP club, so I established the first ALP club there in 1948. And of course, at that time, Meredith, I witnessed and saw this strange situation of the trade unions where they didn't really have their own absolutely autonomous identity. They were sort of part structurally of the Labour Party, and it didn't make sense, it was unreal. But I don't think we should worry too much about that, because that was fixed with the establishment in 1963, particularly of the Trades and Labour Council, now UnionsWA. What has been important for the working people, the ordinary people of this state, has been the essential identity of purpose of the organised trade union movement and of the organised political labour movement. We have essentially the same purposes, and without waxing philosophical, those purposes are the fair go, equality of opportunity, the abolition of discrimination, creating a society in which, irrespective of the income level of the parent, each child is going to have the equal opportunity to develop the talents they have. These are the essential elements that underlie both wings of the labour movement. And you certainly, as Ged has said, have fought strongly to give effect to those principles over the years. Now, this is not a time for the labour movement to be apologetic or going backwards. This is the time when we should be going on the front foot. We should be out there telling our story and telling it strongly, because there is no other organisation in this country now or at any point in its history which has a prouder story to tell than the organised labour movement. No organisation has done more to shape the essential character of this country. You can go up to any Australian and look them in the eye and say, the standard and quality of life that you enjoy is a result of the actions over the past and the present of the organised labour movement. We don't live in a country inhabited by a band of philanthropic bosses. They historically haven't been going around saying, what can we do for you to improve your condition? We are really dreadfully eager to do what we can to see that you share in the benefits of our economic growth. You know, that's bloody nonsense. We've had to fight. Unions have fought industrial action out of the finances of their members, which paid the union dues. They finance significant cases in the Arbitration Commission and political campaigns as well. The standard of wages, the standards of conditions of employment, standard hours of work, annual leave, long service leave, super. All these things which Australians too often tend to take for granted, as I say, weren't the result of beneficent philanthropic employers. People enjoy all of those conditions today because of the people that have gone before you and the fight that you are continuing now. That's the story you should be out there telling them. Make every bloody Australian know that they are indebted to the trade union movement of this country. That's the story to be told. And there's a wider story too, in terms of the role of the union movement in shaping the character and quality of this country. At the end of the Second World War, and when that period I was talking about when I first went to university in 1947, of course I came from a sort of Labor background, as you know. My uncle was leader of the Labor Party, became Premier. But in terms of what influenced me, one of the things that I just wanted to get into this Labor Party was I identified absolutely with the great decision of the wartime and post-war Labor governments to establish the massive post-war immigration program. We should never forget that at the end of the Second World War, we were 98.5% Anglo-Celt. Incredibly high proportion. And in the darkest days of war, Curtin, great West Australian, as Prime Minister, he told his cabinet party, he said, "We are not fighting this war just to restore the Australia of the past. We are fighting this war so that we can create a new and better Australia." And so in those darkest days of war, he set up a Department of Post-War Reconstruction under the leadership of another great West Australian, Ged Kearney. And in those darkest days of war, they were planning for the future. And the most fundamental decision they made was that they would undertake this massive post-war immigration program. The single most important decision, I think, that's been taken by any government in Australian history in determining the character and quality of this country. From 7 million people with a 98.5% Anglo-Celt background, we moved to a situation where we have people who've come from 175, 180 different countries. They brought their background, their culture, their capacities. They have economically enriched us, culturally enriched us, and we have witnessed in this country, of course there have been pockets of prejudice and so on, but basically never anywhere in any country in the world in such a relatively short time has there been such a massive transformation of the composition of the population achieved so peaceably. And that was a decision of a Labor government. But remember this, it couldn't have been done without the cooperation of the trade unions. Naturally enough, the trade unions at that time were apprehensive about the prospect of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of new people coming in, because they had experienced the Great Depression where unemployment had reached a third of the workforce. And even when the war broke out, you still had, and the statistics aren't exact, but it's calculated that the outbreak of war, unemployment was still at least 15%. So that was sort of in the DNA, if you like, of the organised trade union movement, a knowledge of substantial unemployment. And here was Labor, their government, suggesting they were going to bring hundreds of thousands. But with tremendous foresight, my predecessor as President of the ACTU, Albert Monk, and his colleagues, looked to the future. And they said to Curtin, "We will support you." And they undertook quite a campaign in the trade union movement, because understandably, they say, there were a lot of trade union leaders who said, "Bugger this." But that foresight of your predecessors in the trade union movement meant that we made that great decision. But that's not the end of the story of the contribution of the trade unions to the success of this country. When I became the Prime Minister in March of '83, you just need to remember the condition that this country was in economically. I've been saying recently, when we've been talking about some of these things, and one of the things that stuck in my mind more than anything else was a statement of the then Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, who said in 1980, if Australia goes on the way it is, it's going to finish up the poor white trash of Asia. Now that was the assessment of Lee Kuan Yew looking at what was happening, and he was right, because we'd had a generation basically of Conservative government, except for that very short period of 75, and they were men of the past. They didn't understand the changes, the fundamental changes that were taking place in the world, and they assumed that the attitudes, the practices and the policies of the past would be sufficient to cope with the challenges of the present. They were wrong. I inherited an economy in which you had 11% unemployment, 11% inflation, industry which was totally uncompetitive. We were going out backwards. Now, I knew the things that needed to be done because I'd had the benefit of an economic training and experience of 2 national economic inquiries. But it was not enough for me to know what needed to be done. We had to carry the people with us because there were fundamental changes that had to be made. And the trade union movement was absolutely magnificent in this respect. Under the leadership of Bill Kearney in particular, Simon Crean, they were prepared to forego their bargaining power, which was going to increase as we got the economy going. They were prepared to forego money wage increases, except in return improvements in the social wage, education, health and so on, so that Australian industry could become more competitive. And no Australian should ever forget that contribution of the trade union movement in strengthening and reforming and reconstructing the Australian economy. Every economist locally and internationally, every international financial institution has said and written it was the changes made in that period which established the future strength of the Australian economy. And I'm proud of the fact that I was associated with that, and I'm particularly proud of the fact that that trade union movement out of which I sprang into the political movement, that the trade union movement had the greatness of vision and decency and desire for a better and stronger Australia to make those sacrifices. So don't forget that story. This is the story we've got to have our people, the Australian people, understanding, because too easily do they forget these things. Now, the story of the past there, as you can see, is one of which you are entitled to be proud, to be part of a movement which has been so important in making this the best country in the world, in my judgment. And that did not happen by accident. Certainly, we have many natural benefits, but great challenges as well. And those challenges could never have happened. We could have never created this great country without that contribution of the trade union movement, together with their cooperation with the Labor Party that I've outlined. Now, we obviously, in this 50th anniversary, we should be proud of those who have gone before us, who've transformed the movement as well as the country. And in terms of transforming the movement, let me say, Meredith and Ged, that when I went first to the ACTU in 1958, the thing that struck me was the number of men of outstanding talent who, because they hadn't had the opportunity of a secondary and certainly a tertiary education, men who would have gone on to be professors, architects, doctors, lawyers, you name it. And these great men were there serving their fellow Australians. Now I say men because that was the thing. In those days, there was virtually no women officials. And one of the great pleasures for me in life is the way in which we have reformed ourselves in that sense. And I can't tell you what a great pleasure it is for me to see so many women coming through to top positions. That's the way it should be, because that's the essence of what Australia is about. Equality of opportunity. The abolition of discrimination of any form, whether it be based on gender, race or creed. Now, okay, we think about these things and we look back on them with pride, justifiable pride. But the battles are not finished. And we are now faced very much in this state and nationally with the Conservatives who want again to go backwards. And as part of that, want to see this great trade union movement which has made the country what it is, they want to cast it as an enemy. Now, the battle is still there to be fought and to be won. You know more about the challenge here in this state than I do. But federally, we now have a situation where the worst of conservatism is starting to show its ugly head again in the area of education. Julia Gillard made some mistakes, of course, but one of the great contributions she made was to move towards this education revolution, to ensure that what Labor had started over the years in creating an equality of opportunity, that should be strengthened and confirmed and never be put in danger again. And what we're witnessing now at the national level is the blatant breaking of a promise that was made during the election and the creation of a situation in which we're again going to have an education system marked by discrimination and which will have something of a return to a situation where the capacity of a child to have his or her talents developed will depend too much on the size of the parental wallet rather than the intrinsic talents of the child. This is a great challenge. So my friends, I conclude by saying that if we want best to honour those who've gone before us, who've done so much to create the quality and nature of this country, to advance the fundamental Labor principles of equality of opportunity, abolition of discrimination, if we want best to honour them, we should rededicate ourselves now to continue that fight against the forces of conservatism that would have us return to a situation where those great principles are in danger. Thank you.
Well, that is a bit of a tough act to follow, but can I just rise to say most sincerely thank you for your comments, thank you for your speech today. It is, of course, truly inspiring to hear from you, someone who has played such an important role both in the Labor movement and in the Labor Party over a period of time. So I certainly take away from that lots of inspiration for the work that we still have to do, and we know that we have to do if we're to continue to do our important work in representing and advancing the interests of working people in this state. I did want to, in closing, just make a few very brief thank yous, not only to Bob for coming and speaking and to Ged for joining us today. I did also want to acknowledge the work that Ged referred to that's been done by Ben Archer in documenting a short history of the Trades and Labour Council, and obviously that's no mean feat when you're talking about union officials to document a short history, but he has done that, and we thank him for his work with Neil Byrne and with Bobby Oliver from the Labour History Society. We will make that available to people, and I think it is very important that we not only document that short and hopefully very readable history, but that we capture the oral histories from the people who have lived in those more recent times. So it's been important work that he's done. I did also want to, on this occasion, take the opportunity to thank the Assistant Secretary of UnionsWA, Owen Whittle, and also the other staff at UnionsWA. So not just for their work this morning in hosting this event, although I do particularly thank them for making sure that this morning's been a great success, but really for their work all the time at UnionsWA. They are a great bunch. They're hardworking, they're good-humoured, and they're talented, and I feel very fortunate, actually, to work with such a great group. So I did want to, on this occasion, record very much my thanks to them. We know in the union movement that we stand on the shoulders of the people who come before us, that really our success depends very much on the people who have held positions before us, who have contributed before us. And so the last thank you really I want to make today is to all of you who are in the room today. There are many who are not here who have also contributed, but we know that it's a collective effort to do what it is that we do in the union movement. We know that none of us on our own can make the difference that we want to make, that it is really a work that we do together. It is a work we do with those who come before us, and we do the work because we want to leave something better for the people who will come after us. And whether they come after us into leadership positions in the union movement, or whether they're ordinary working people who will thank us for our work in terms of advancing and protecting the workers' rights, it is an important legacy that we leave behind. We know that we face attacks. We know that they'll come locally from the Conservative government in WA. They'll come federally as well. But we've always met those sort of challenges with a collective will and a collective power that means that we want to leave a better future for those who come after us. And that means not just working to ensure that working people have good lives, good jobs where they have good pay and safe work. It's also about leaving a legacy of good lives for working people so that they can live and work with some dignity and with some respect. So for the last 50 years, through the peak union body in this state, all of us have contributed to where we are today. So I thank you for your contributions. And I know that as we go forward from this room today, that we'll continue that important work, not just to deliver a good outcome for working people, but we'll do it because we know that we are part of a decent civil society in this state.